people who don't believe in the existence of God, they make this allegation that God did not create us, but it is rather something that we have created. It's more or less a figment of our imagination, as it were. How would we look at that, and what would we say?
It's a very, as I mentioned, it's a very Freudian concept in the fact that Sigmund Freud mentioned this as well in his Oedipus complex. The fact that when man, it's a long and, a very interesting philosophy of his, but in fact, the crux of it is that man and the bond between a father and a son is a connection, and eventually when the son grows up, moves out of the shadow of the father, he has a void, and to fill that void, mankind has made this concept of God. But the fact is that if mankind has invented God, then the whole purpose of prophets, the whole nature of revelation wouldn't work. And what I mean by that is that as an Ahmadi and believer of the promised Messiah of the latter days, we as a community know firsthand that God does exist. And it's not a figment of our imagination. In fact, it's proven from time immemorial when God Almighty sent prophets with the same message, that there is a God. And to this day, even if you ask even the general Muslim public that whether you can communicate with God or not, to this day, Christians, other Muslims will say maybe, or it's difficult to form a connection with God. He doesn't speak anymore, etc., etc., etc. But as Ahmadi Muslims, we know for a fact that God spoke before, just as He does today, and that's why the promised Messiah ﷺ was sent to form that connection between man and God once again. So, to answer your question, if man created God in his own imagination, then I ask, why is it that a man in the desert who was illiterate and not in a status of power, he didn't have any influence in that time, he brought about a magnificent revolution in the fact that the Bedouins of those people who were living like bandits almost were formed into people who were at the highest peak of moral excellence. And that revolution exists to this day, because when we present this, people often say, oh, but there were other great political leaders in the world, many people did great things, Alexander the Great conquered a lot of the world. But my question is that to this day, who aspires to become like Alexander the Great, or who aspires to become like Napoleon, etc.?
And Alexander the Great never made any claims
exactly.
either. But you have this one man who's outnumbered. He has a small community of maybe 1,000 followers, if that, half of whom are slaves and from the weaker sectors of society. And he says that Allah is going to help me and I'm going to triumph over all of you. And my message is going to spread to the ends of the earth, and you can try and murder me, you can try and execute me, you can try and persecute my followers, and do whatever you will, but God will make me victorious. And then that happens.
Exactly.
So there's a huge difference between those prophets who are outnumbered and who make these claims, and then their claims are proven true because they have something in the back, that backs them. And you can either accept that that's God, or there's something really interesting that someone said, that for someone to make a prophecy, for example, a man who doesn't have knowledge of things which are beyond the mental scope of him at that time, there are certain available pieces of data which you can collect and then make a conclusion based on that. But let's say a man who lives in the desert, he's making prophecies about things 1400 years later, and those things actually happen, and we see that those things took place and are taking place. That person said that either you should accept that there was a God who gave him that information, or either accept that that man is God. Because how can a normal person make these claims and then for them to be fulfilled?
Exactly. There's so many in the Quran, Usman Sahib, like for example the fact that the universe is expanding.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a concept that we find in the 20th century that was discovered when Edwin Hubble discovered the fact that light from other galaxies would shift towards the red end of the spectrum. They discovered the fact that the universe is in fact expanding. Now, the Quran clearly states this, that we are the creators of this heavens and we make them expand constantly. So the fact is that these you know,
illiterate man who didn't know how to read and write.
Even write his
who
own
said-
name, in fact.
He couldn't even write his own name, but he says that Allah has revealed these words to me. And even Western Orientalists accept that the Holy Quran is a book which is preserved in the original language from 1400 years to now. And today we have that book, and it says in that book, in Arabic, that we have created the universe and we make it go on expanding. And that's proven through scientific evidence now. How can these things be chance?
So it's based